Hello guys, this is my first video on this channel and I'm gonna be taking this GTX 1095 apart, and this is sort of a tutorial video, and the reason I'm making this because I have not seen anywhere on YouTube the video that shows how to actually properly take this card apart. If you're not familiar, GTX 1095 was pretty much the highest end possible graphics card in 2009 from Nvidia, of course, and someone is really not liking me and my audio, just forgive me that. And this is sort of an unusual construction. You could see this in other GPUs such as 9800 GX2, I believe. That was also very similar design. This is pretty much two GTX's 275 stuck together. So we got one PCB here, another one there, and the heatsink is in the middle. The GPUs are facing each other. So this is pretty hot design, and generally if you are running any system with this GPU, any retro system, you would really want to have a custom fan curve on this. Basically it is needed for this graphics card in order to prevent it from overheating. If you have new thermal paste and all that, I would suggest bringing the fan up to about, I think, 90% to prevent this from overheating. And I did not do the tests with a closed case. I think that would be pretty bad situation. But at the end of this video, I'm gonna show you my fan curve for the GTX 1095, and the one I think is really good for it. So let's start. What will you need? First, we're gonna take this type of screwdriver. It basically has this nut here that you can easily take off these standoffs. That will be pretty needed. Then you want to go ahead and take flathead screwdriver. It is essential for splitting this sandwich open because they really like to stick to their heatsinks. And at the end, we're gonna use this set of screwdrivers. And what is essential is that we want to have really long and slim tip, because there is one place that you need to reach for it. Also, what I suggest doing is, for first, never do it on a carpet or anything like that. That could make a lot of static and possibly kill this GPU. It's already dead, so there's not really a matter here. And the second thing is that these things accumulate so much dust and dirt that you really don't want your carpet ruined. So I think we are gonna get right into it. So first, take one of your screwdrivers, like this one. Let me show you the bit. And there are 3 screws at the top of the GPU, as well as 3 at the bottom. Some versions have a screw right here, that is the 4th one, but this one has 3, so I'm just gonna get right into disassembling this GPU. Also suggest storing the screws in a place you're not gonna lose them, because that would be pretty unwanted. Okay, as we remove the screws, we can see that it shifted a little bit. That's normal. So how to open this top lid? You first need to take it from this side and sort of pull out. And it should look a little bit like this. Then you can safely take it off. And you can now see the second PCB. And yes, I said this card is dead. You can see someone tried to repair it. It's not my job. So now, what do we have to do? is we should take this shield off. So this is where this screwdriver comes in handy. I hope not to block the view, and just take these standard standoffs out. Now we get back to our first screwdriver and unscrew these two screws. They are holding this shield onto the heatsink, so you shouldn't forget about these two. You can see it's starting to bend away a little bit, but that's not the end. If you flip the card, you can see that here are two metal pieces that hold it to the PCB. And this is where a real slim drive come in handy. Here's a hole that you can really easily push your screwdriver through and proceed to take the screw out. It doesn't need a lot of... oh crap. Well, it sometimes falls out from the other side. As I said, it doesn't need too much rotation. And here's another one that unfortunately does not have a hole, but you can easily take it out like that. Okay. Now that the shield is off, we can take a look right here. Usually this part of the shield will be really dusty, so remember, don't put it in a place you don't want it dirty. Okay, now that you have our graphics card pretty much bare, we can proceed to unscrew the PCBs. You can remember that the part that is covered with this lid has black screws all over it. And also, you should remember the orientation of that NVIDIA bar here. It's held by black screws. Okay, so let's start this assembly. Oh, and also very important note. You can see all around the core you have these small screws. They're not spring-loaded, unlike these, and you should not be touching them. They're holding this metal bar that is around the core to support the PCB structure in order to not get bent. Also, I suggest putting even pressure by either unscrewing or screwing the screws down in sort of like cross pattern, and this way you can prevent the PCB from bending. Now that we have all screws gone from here, we can flip the card to the other side and repeat the same pattern. Okay, now that we have screws gone, these two PCBs should be mechanically free, but it's not really the truth. This is where this screwdriver comes in handy. Since my GPU was taken apart a lot of times, the PCBs are not really holding to the heatsink. But since your GPU is used, it's very likely that the thermal residue that was all over the GPU core as well as these thermal pads are pretty much acting like a glue now. So you take this, you shove it between this metal support bar and heatsink, and really gently, not slamming the screwdriver into the card, you pry it like this. Okay? You do the same over here, and once you got it free, I suggest you put it upside down like this on your table, SLI connector facing you, and you gently, really gently lift this part up. We can see now, if I'm able to move this closer to me, that we have here two SLI ribbon connectors. Take a flathead screwdriver and really gently pop them out of their sockets. And also you have to remember that on this PCB you have a fan header. So do the following and unplug it. And this way we have the first part free. This is a GPU number 2. Then we can proceed to the other part of the GPU. You get it, you lift it off the table. You do the same thing with screwdriver. And basically at this point you should be free to take the heatsink off. So here's a GPU number 1 and here's a heatsink. Keep in mind that the thermal paste and the thermal pads will be all over here. So since we have this flat part here, we can really easily put it like that. But put it in a place that you won't knock it over. So here's our base PCB. And here are the SLI connectors. Now, listen to this. This is a very important part. If you look on these ribbons, you can see these small arrows. They are corresponding to these silk screen arrows here. So I suggest you taking a Sharpie and writing something here that will indicate that this part was connected to PCB with no PCIe connector. Like no PCI and arrow down, that would suggest you how the NVIDIA logo is oriented. Either way, if you feel confident enough, you can plop these off and just remember the way they were in, looking on these small arrows. Okay, so we have two PCBs here. If you wonder, here we have two RAM decks and here's an NVIDIA SLI bridge. You can see that mine has seen really better days. That's because a really long time ago, when I was putting this card back together, and of course have not seen any videos, I have mismatched these SLI connectors. So I believe this one, this shorter one, was the other way around and it basically cooked this SLI chip. It's probably only this bridge to the point where no GPU was harmed, but I don't feel like I need to repair this card, maybe in the future, but now there is no need for that. Another thing that you should look for are these plastic sort of fibers. They're used to, if I can take it off, well, I cannot, maybe on the second card you will see what I mean. Okay, you have to believe me or see if my focus is well enough. You can see this small LED in there. That indicates whether the card receives power, whether there is some fault in the card, or I believe it was that part that this LED turns blue whenever the GPU gives you display. Okay, so we're gonna take these somewhere else. Now we go to the heatsink part. You can see that there are corresponding grooves in the heatsink for RAM deck, SLI chip, main GPU, and of course RAM, as well as VRAMs. It's basically mirrored here, except for the SLI chip. There is no SLI chip on the second GPU. So once you get it all clean off of the thermal paste, you can proceed to removing the fan. If you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, and from the other side 1, 2, 3. These are the screws that hold this piece onto the heatsink so we can remove them. Also, you should remember to take out the fan wire out of this notch. And now that the screws are off, we can safely take this metal part out. Now we come to the fan part. This is pretty much the last part of the disassembly. So we can see that there's 1, 2, and the third one is here, covered by shadows. So we're gonna take these out too. I suggest having a magnetic bit because this really helps a lot. Okay, now we have the screws off, we can take out the fan. You can see the wire here. We're gonna bend it in that direction so it doesn't get cut. And if you try, you might think that the fan is unremovable or either it blocks at this point. Well, that's pretty easy. You have to bend this open and sort of force the fan out. But keep in mind that you have the wire. And here we have the fan. And now we can get quite a good look at the heatsink. And here's a pretty good example why dual GPU graphics designs that include one heatsink and two PCBs really failed so much. So imagine this. You have two GPUs, well, downclocked, but still, two GPUs that are, well, pretty power hungry. I mean, this is G200. This is a GTX 200 series. And you put them against each other, well, separated by heatsink, but still, you put them against each other and only belong on this tiny little fan. That doesn't mean it's not powerful, but running at around 40% that it does in the idle and really slowly ramping up under load, it's not possible for this fan on stock settings to cool this beast enough. So that's why I was telling you that you should really take care of that fan curve and adjust it to your own preferences. And by preferences, I mean temperature preferences. You don't want the GPU to reach over 90 degrees, and ideally I would sit under 85. Well, that's my opinion, but I mean, I really like to treat the hardware as it deserves to. So, in that in mind, we can pretty much put this card back together, and we can imagine that we are putting new thermal paste and thermal pads all over this. If you wonder, this GPU has 1mm thick thermal pads, and if you're using 100mm by 15, you will pretty much need 5, although I will buy 6 if you screw up something. And how do I suggest putting the thermal pads? Well, you can first put a thermal pad here, of course cutting off the excess because we'll have something left, another thermal pad here, also cutting the excess, and well, it sort of goes on. In terms of pattern of the thermal paste, I'm gonna show you a photo right now how I prefer to put the thermal paste on such a big dice, and from what I tested it works really well. Okay, so we can put this card back together, I guess. Of course, we're reversing the steps here, and if you don't remember how the wire was going, you can take this metal part, put it as it was, just like that, and see where the notch is, or rather the hook. So you put your fan, it aligns with the holes, and you can see where the wire should be. So take that off. There we go. Now we can screw them down really nice. And there, the fan is on its place. Now comes the time for this small piece. There we go. And screw it down. Now, with the help of this hook, we can force the wire in. There we go. And the heatsink is done. Okay, now comes the harder part. You remember I was telling you about these SLI bridges? Yeah, you need to really take care of this. If you mess up, there's no excuse. This thing is gonna blow up. There we go. So put this in. If you will ever find problems while installing your SLI bridges, for instance, they like to fall out, you see these metal pieces? You can try to squish them really gently to make this more narrow. That way the connector will have more grip. So let's say you have put your thermal paste and all that. So we are taking the part of the heatsink that is corresponding to the PCB. We can judge that by these two notches. On the other side there's none, as well as here there's only one chip, that is RAM back. So I suggest holding the heatsink in one hand and putting this over the top of it. Also keep in mind that the SLI connectors are really flimsy, so they can fall out. But if you align this pretty well, you can look at the screw holes and align them to threads beneath. It should hold onto thermal residue enough, but if you're not confident, I suggest you can put 2 screws in, just like that, and really gently put them in. And that way our PCB is somewhat secured, so it doesn't drift. You can also make sure your SLI connectors are in place by squishing this part a bit, but don't do it too hard. And now comes the probably hardest part of this all. I suggest you take one person to help you, because there are a lot of things that could go bad here. For instance, one part could tip over or something like that. But remember about the fan connector, otherwise the card won't post. And connect your SLI bridges. Able to do it alone, but trust me, it's sometimes really hard. Align it, and there we go. It's mostly back together. Now what is left is to put these screws on their place. So I'm gonna do same thing which I did to the other side, put only 2, and take a card for inspection. You should see the SLI bridge here. You can squish these 2 pieces to make sure they're in their sockets. And now, last thing left to do is to put all these screws back together. So a few important tips about screwing these screws back. I suggest you do it in a cross pattern. So first we're gonna tighten these a little bit. There. Bring this to a full tight. Like that. And then you can tighten up these a little bit. And you can now screw them down fully. Now you should do pretty much the same in terms of the RAM deck section. So you just screw it down a little bit. We are doing this to apply even pressure. There we go. Remember, even pressure on all the screws is very important. You can do the same here. Say VRM section. And right there it pretty much doesn't matter. So I can screw them down one by one. Okay, now it's the second half. Now it's time for this NVIDIA plastic cover. So we just put it right there. And the top of the logo should be in the IO direction. And now we pretty much do the same what we did to first PCB. So nice crossline here. We keep this for RAM as well as the library section. Now screw down this NVIDIA logo cover. And screw down the support. And there we go. Our GPU is pretty much fully intact. You can also take this time to see if your thermal paste got distributed evenly on the IHS to both sides. You can also inspect if the thermal pads are aligned really well. And if you see this PCB get bent here, you shouldn't be scared because that's pretty much how this is meant to be. Oh, and here's a very important part. You can see this hole as well as one beneath, and the same here. Here should be two plastic standoffs that, well, basically do not do anything, but they are here just in case, maybe, I don't know, squishing this part too hard. Once you take both of the PCBs out, I suggest putting them in a safe place and remembering before putting this sort of sandwich together. I mean, there's nothing bad if you forget, but it's good to have the things as they should be. So now let's get onto this PCI bracket. You can see these two plastic thingies that I was talking about earlier. So you put this metal over the top and maneuver it just to get these plastics fit in the holes. You can push them with a screwdriver if that helps. Sometimes it's a little bit harder, but there we go, plopped in place. So to make matters easy, I'm gonna first screw this down, or actually not down, just put the screw not all the way in to make it hold its place for these to not disturb us. And now comes pretty annoying part of putting these small screws in that like to fall in, but they shouldn't fall into the heatsink. So you should be pretty good with that. Now shove your screwdriver through here and screw it down. Same thing on the opposite side. Just need to figure out how to put this there. and you can see that sometimes it doesn't want to screw in. So you have to sort of flip the card upside down and then bend this bracket to match the screw hole. And there we go. This is on tight. This is on pretty tight as well. And now the only thing left to do is to screw in these standoffs. Now take a time to screw these all the way in. And there we go. Wow, it's surprisingly straight in here. Great. So now the only thing, oh, don't drop your graphics card. The only thing left to do is to put this lid back on. We do it opposite as we were taking it off, so you can see this groove here. So first you match it with a groove in the heatsink, push it down a little bit and sort of put it back. Remember that here is a notch too. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and put these screws on their place. And that's it. Your GTX 295 has new thermal paste and is looking like a new one. Well, only if you took the time and clean it. I hope you did. So now you can see a GTX 295 in, well, sort of modern PC. Of course, this is the other one that is not broken, because the broken one is all the way up here. Focus. There we go. Alongside with broken 480 and some Radeons. But get back to this. So now I'm gonna show you how it should act in a working condition. So first you power it on. There we go. If you didn't screw up the power, it should be green. And there we go. BIOS initialized and blue light off life. So as you can see, we are running pretty low temperatures right now, around 40, 39 degrees on each core. And now there's a very important thing about the fan. So normally, if you would have installed your afterburner and drivers, you would be stuck with this. Empty bar, no way of controlling fan. So what you need to do is go to settings and choose GPU number 2. This will allow us to change the fan speed on command, whether we want it loud or whether we want it like this, and also, which is very important thing, setting a fan curve. This is my go-to with most of the GPUs from GTX 200 series. You just have a straight line, except that for each temperature there is +10 fan percent. So for instance, if we are running 30 degrees C, the fan is running at 40%. If we are running, say, 50 degrees C, the fan is at 60%. And finally, if we are running 80 degrees C, the fan is at 90%. And believe me, that is very efficient. Maybe not noise-proof, but your card will not overheat for sure. So let's hit it with Formwork, I guess. Let's go, GPU stress test. You can see right away that we have quite low frames as for dual GPU. That's because Formwork does not utilize dual GPU entirely. It's more of like loading two GPUs, but giving you FPS from only one of them. Which, if you think about, well, one GTX 275 downclocked would be around this spot. GTX 285 on stock speed, for instance, is about 24 FPS, if you're curious. There's also one little thing I want to show you. If we go to NVIDIA control panel, as you can see, we have SLI enabled, and I suggest you set the PhysX to CPU because, at least from what I have tested, this increased the performance a little bit because one of our cores of the GPU got unloaded. So that's pretty much it. I think this sums up pretty much everything I wanted to tell you about GTX 295. It's really awesome card. It's also power hungry, so make sure you give it at least 550 watts, I would say. This would be bare minimum, or actually bare minimum would be 500 watts, but on a very good power supply. In normal rig, I would suggest running it with like 600 watt power supply or something along the lines of that to have some headroom for other parts. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys for watching and see you in the next video.